and welcome to another episode of the Titans of the Southwest podcast. I'm your host today, Lito, and with me I have
Big Mo.
And today we have a pretty special episode for you guys. We have part one of the interview with Rhett Bryan of Titans Radio. Mo, how'd you think it went, man?
Oh, super great guy, man. For him to dedicate that amount of time to us, just talking Titans, especially somebody having been with the organization for so long, through all the ebb and flows. I mean, it was a great experience for us, and I hope our listeners enjoy as well, man. A lot of great content on there, past, present, and future. Loved it.
Yeah, it was a blast just getting out and talking to this guy. We touched on so many things. This was originally going to be just a one episode podcast, just so you guys know, but he was just so cool, so easy to talk to, had so much knowledge. We could have stayed on the phone with him for way longer. I mean, we talked for a couple hours as it is, but we could have went well into the night just talking Titans, talking history, talking everything. So we decided we're going to split this up into two episodes, so it's a little bit more palatable for everybody. But we really think you're going to enjoy it. Like you said, Mo, we touched on, I mean, his professional background, that the move, pivotal moments, personal stories, memories, and then also the Titans going forward. And he had some stories that left me speechless, to be honest with you.
Great stories, and the way he told the stories, the imagery. I mean, you feel like you're experiencing the moment with him. It was incredible.
It was amazing. And even little Johnny Unitas story popped up in there somehow, and that was I couldn't even talk after that. I was like, whoa, like Johnny freaking Unitas, man. That is amazing. So what we're going to do, guys, we're just going to send you into the first part of the two-part interview that we had with Rhett Bryan. You're really going to enjoy it, and if you don't enjoy it, then there's probably something wrong with you. Give us a call or reach out to us, and we'll tell you why you're wrong for not enjoying this, because this is just absolutely amazing. Mo, you got anything before we throw to part one?
No, let's roll it. Tighten up.
Tighten up.
Follow us on Twitter at Titans Southwest, and remember to like and subscribe to the podcast, as well as review and share.
And welcome to another episode of Titans of the Southwest podcast. My name is Lito. I got my co-host with me, Big Mo, and we have a special guest on today. We have Rhett Bryan of Titans Radio joining us, and we're just going to go through and kind of pick his brain a little bit, talk about some Titans, and see how much info we can get from him on all kinds of topics. Mo, how you feeling about this?
I'm very excited, man. Very honored to have him jump on board and agree to dedicate some of his time to us to talk Titans, because that's what we like to do. Really looking forward to picking your brain and finding out a little bit more information about what led you to want to become a radio personality, so on and so forth.
Cool. I'm glad to have the privilege and the honor of being on Titans of the Southwest podcast. This is cool, guys. Very cool.
Hey, we appreciate it. We had Nate Bain on previously. We had a John Kinsley. He kind of diagnoses some plays. I think you and Nate are the first ones that are really close to the organization. That it just feels weird. Two guys from New Mexico being able to actually talk with you guys and pick your brain. It's something that wasn't really even on our radar about a year ago. So we really appreciate it, like Mo said. I just kind of want to start off with kind of getting into your professional background. Like, what happened? Like, how did you get here? Like, where did you start? Like, I'm really, really interested in the progression of this whole thing. If you don't mind kind of fleshing that out for me a little
Sure. Bit. I'll be glad to, Lito. I took a long and unconventional route to get to where I currently am. I will be entering season 5 when the football season starts as the executive producer and game day host of Titans Radio. But let's rewind. First of all, to answer Big Mo's question, when I was probably, I was probably 11, 12 years old, I got an alarm clock radio And for millennials out there, that's a device that you still use to get up in the daytime, in the morning to go to school or work. And it wasn't, it was pre-iPhone for sure. But, it was an alarm clock and an AM/FM radio. And it was the old kind that had the tiles that flipped over that would tell you the time constantly. It was really, really old school. And I started listening to the radio. And I'd always listened to music and things at an early age and collected records and played records. But I started listening to the radio a lot, kind of at a low volume all night long, probably when I was, 5th, 6th, 7th grade. And I started thinking subliminally at the time, I was like, well, how does that guy know how to talk over that record? How does this person know how to do a traffic report? How does this person know how to do a sports cast or a weather forecast? And how do all these elements come together? And I really got curious about it. And even having a record player as a young kid, I would talk over records like I was on the radio, just because that's what I thought was cool. And I would, do impersonations and impressions of famous people. And my parents kind of fostered and nurtured that when I was a kid. And sure enough, when I got into high school and everything, I knew that if I was going to talk in front of people, I would have to get over some apprehension about, speaking in front of crowds or over the airwaves. So I took a couple of years of public speaking in high school, took a couple of years of drama, and that really kind of knocked that off for me, and had a really good time doing that. And then when I graduated high school, and I'm a native of Middle Tennessee, so I was born and raised not far from the home headquarters of the Titans, and I wanted to try something in that field. And luckily for me, my grades weren't super great, and I didn't apply myself very well in high school. And I didn't go to 4-year college. I went to a technical college. In fact, the college doesn't even exist anymore in Nashville. There was a broadcasting course, and I just dove in head first. And I finished, I think, second in my class, and got lucky enough that a buddy of mine in the class was hired to do some part-time work at the local rock station in Nashville, and he got me in the door. And from there, it was just paying dues. You hear stories about, just guys doing whatever they could to try to get ahead. And so through a myriad of jobs as a young guy right out of high school, I worked in a music research department for the album-oriented rock station, and kind of clawed my way in and working in promotions and being a remote tech, setting up for remote broadcasts for other air personalities. And then that worked into my first on-air deal at all, was doing traffic reports for Nashville traffic, which is vastly different than what it is today. It's night and day different because the populace is much different. And I finally, after working there for about 2.5, 3 years, got my foot in the door with the program director, and he said, "Hey, would you like to come on the air and do some swing shift stuff?" And I had some buddies that were kind of going to bat for me. And at the time, our flagship station, 104.5 The Zone, WGFX, was a classic rock station. And so I started working weekends and overnights, and when someone needed to fill in for someone that was sick or on vacation. And I did that for a while, and just kind of slipped my way into working 7 to midnight. And so I was playing classic rock records on what is now the flagship station for the Titans then. And it's really strange, because that's where the birth of everything with the Titans moving to Nashville. I was right in that window of time. I'd been on the air for a couple of years, and I'll never forget working a 7 to midnight shift and getting a phone call from Houston, Texas. And it was from Floyd Reese, the general manager of the Titans, of the Houston Oilers at the time, from his secretary or administrator there, as they were reaching out, trying to figure out radio stations that would, go through a bid process to create a flagship station and a radio network. And I remember, quickly telling them the general manager's name and direct line, and tried to, get everything together for that. And the next thing I know, the station won the bid rights for this. And this is a window of time in Nashville where there weren't any professional sports. We had a minor league baseball team that's still here. It was rumored a couple of years earlier that the New Jersey Devils were going to move from New Jersey, and we would have a hockey team here. Of course, that changed, and we have the Predators here now. Mm-hmm. And, the next thing you know, here come the Houston Oilers. The Mayor Phil Bredesen and K.S. Bud Adams had struck a deal to come to Tennessee, and it was just unbelievable that we never had any pro sports franchises in where we live. In fact, you were a product. Most fans around here from the old regime were, and still are fans of the Cowboys or Washington or Green Bay, because that was the game of the week that you got on television prior to, big time cable packages and satellite stuff. And because Atlanta and Cincinnati was so bad, back then. And so here come the Houston Oilers. So the radio station hired Larry Stone, the original executive producer and game day host of the network, and he came over from the North Carolina Tar Heels. He had kind of developed their radio network and worked very closely with their basketball program and the late great Dean Smith of college basketball. And I remember them bringing me into the conference room and saying, I'd like you to meet Larry Stone, and he has a question for you. And he said, well, how would you like to cover an NFL team? And I was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding? I'm like the resident sports nut here in the building. Wow. Are you kidding? Absolutely. I'd love to do that. And so I think it was either later that afternoon or the next day, he hands me a recorder and a mic, a wired mic, and I go to the Lowe's Vanderbilt Plaza Hotel on West End in downtown Nashville to cover a press conference where Bruce Matthews and Frank Wycheck and Mr. Adams are there talking about the Tennessee Oilers and a logo unveil and all those kinds of things. So here we go, and a short time thereafter, they had their first training camp at Tennessee State University at Hale Stadium in the summer of '97. And so throughout that period of time, I was doing whatever I could to try to help cover. I covered their practices when they practiced in Bellevue, right next to a shopping mall, before they finished St. Thomas Sports Park over in Metro Center. And so I covered practice and press conferences there. And then in 1999 is when I started traveling with the team, and I was Mike Keith's spotter, the guy that kind of keeps up with everybody on the field and certain substitutions and everything. Mike always would watch offense. I would watch defense and special teams and anything else that he didn't catch. And so it kind of just went from there. But that's a very long-winded answer, but that's kind of where I'm at to get into here. And then, Larry Stone left in the spring of 2014, and I was very, very fortunate and blessed to be considered for this position, and having no idea how many moving parts were involved in that role, because I, was the spotter and a kind of a game day reporter and would do locker room reports post game. And it's been a real learning curve, a learning experience for me, but just unbelievable. I pinch myself almost daily to consider myself where I am right now.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, going from just whenever you're talking about those old alarm clocks and having that kind of mentality as you were younger, I can completely relate, and I'm sure Mo probably can as well. Just having that mindset, talking over and wondering the ins and outs, the behind the scenes kind of stuff. I did that on a constant basis as well, and it would be amazing. Like, there's a band that they're playing a lot and you really get into them, and then, turns out they're coming to town, and it's like, oh my gosh, how do they do that? Like, I actually like this band now. And just the small little stuff like that is incredible, to just be in the right place, right time, and then just putting in the work as well. I mean, going from, I'm sure you were organizing albums and everything from the ground up, and then getting to where you are now. That's awesome. I'm sorry. I had questions in mind while you were going through all that stuff, but I'm just like, I'm sitting and listening. I'm just like, that's incredible.
Well, and let me say this too. All of our guys, most all of our guys on the road crew, we're all radio junkies and have been from day one. We call it, getting the bug. Once you get the bug, it's hard to get rid of the bug. Mike Keith was playing records on the radio when he was a teenager. Larry Stone, same thing. Philip Noel, our road engineer and producer, same thing. Brad Willis, our spotter and producer, same thing. And I was working in a good sized rock station, not on the air, but as a teenager right out of high school, and worked my way in, was on the air in my early 20s. We just have a love for what we do and certainly a passion. And Larry Stone set that bar really high a long time ago with the quality of product that Titans Radio puts out, whether it's production value, content, telling the story, and telling it properly. And we try to follow that every game day that we possibly can. But it's a fun ride, and getting a lot more fun now with where the Titans are headed. So, and I'm sure we'll get into that.
Oh yeah, we're gonna touch on all of that. It's just flat out incredible to be honest with you. I'm sure you were a big fan of Casey Kasem and things like that as well. You mentioned impressions. I have to ask: are you able to do a Casey Kasem impression?
Keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars.
That's awesome.
Yeah, Casey Kasem was that was appointment radio, and whoever carried his top 40 countdown when I was a kid, that was always on Sunday mornings, and that was appointment radio. We always listened to Rick Dees because he was out of Memphis at the time. Scott Shannon worked in this market very early on, and is a big time guy in radio. But yeah, and certainly when you're talking about play-by-play voices on Saturdays, it was appointment radio in the fall with John Ward with the University of Tennessee Volunteers, one of the best to ever do it, period. But yeah, Casey Kasem and those guys were certainly an influence when I was a kid.
Definitely, and I don't know a lot of those names that you're saying, just to be completely honest. I think I've heard of them here and there, but being on this side of the country, you don't hear a lot. We're primarily Mike Keith. Mike Keith is what we grew up with, what we heard. I had Mike Keith as a ringtone for a really long time, which is not it's not easy to find, but I was able to find it, splice it, and put it as my ringtone whenever I get a text or anything. I would hear.
And what was he saying?
Touchdown Titans. It was yeah, it was great, and I would wear it proudly, and I would turn my volume all the way up, and so that way, if I was in a crowded place, everybody could hear it, and it was a great ringtone for a long time. What do you think,
Excellent.
Mo?
Mike Keith has been the soundtrack to a lot of my favorite Titans memories, that's for sure. I actually had a question for you, Rhett, since you brought up being a spotter for Mike Keith. How chaotic was that, being a spotter initially, or did you kind of just find your groove right away?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that, Mo, because yes, it was chaotic at first, and certainly I was in the early days of working with Mike, but finding out and figuring out what he liked and what he really wanted and what he was looking for. And certainly if you didn't find it, he would let you know. It's like, hey, here's what I really need. But Mike is so easy to work with. And I know I'm biased, but he is just unbelievably incredible with his retention. He has a freakish nature of remembering. I mean, you could ask him about something and he's like, oh yeah, that was the 2002 season on the road at Baltimore, blah, blah, blah. He just reeled off stats and things. He's just incredible like that. But now he studies his rear end off. That's a guy that puts in, I don't know how many hours every week prior to a Sunday or whatever kickoff, constantly studies. But yeah, that was, he's fun to work with. He's easy to work with. And so that was a really good transition, especially getting into learning, what he wanted and what he needed at the time. Now, you're right in terms of chaos, because you're needing
very
to
fast
get
pace, right?
Yeah, right. You're needing to get him through a series of hand signals and pointing at a numerical or an alphabetical roster who did what before he gets it out of his mouth. And so, yeah, absolutely. And that's where his quarterback sack call came from. He tips that to me, and I didn't even realize it till some years later. He said, oh yeah, he said there was a game that was, it was one of those 12-9 Baltimore Ravens, slugfest, and it was kind of back and forth. And he said, I remember vividly. I'm like, wow, he just exuberantly said sack, and it woke me up. And he said, and that's probably what I needed at the time, was to wake me up, because I was probably zoned out with some of those games back then. But he says that was for me, and it has been one of his signature calls ever since. And personally, I'm a defense guy, so I love it when he calls that multiple times per game.
Oh yeah.
That one, I remember whenever we went to the game, I'm watching it, and I just hear Mike Keith's calls like that. Whenever we sacked someone, I heard that. Or if I saw a rackpo, I would hear that you've just been a rackpo, and all of it, man, it was really incredible. Even whenever the red zone, the ads that he does. Like I hear that
Yes.
in my mind as part of what he's saying. Similar to whenever you hear a song on a CD, you just automatically think of the beginning of the next song because as part of it. I remember hearing all of that stuff in my head, and he's absolutely incredible whenever it comes to that kind of stuff. And whenever I hear him on the radio, I wonder, does he have the stuff in front of him, or does he just have like that good of recall to just pull this stuff from like his experience? And so it's kind of nice to know that going forward, whenever I hear it, he's just pulling this stuff right from his experience and from.
Well, and he would be the first to tell you. Now, he's got a folder of notes. Obviously, he's going to, have everybody's got a flip chart that they kind of build of their own. And he's got his own way of doing those things. And he has things that he'll certainly look at to refer to, and whether it's taped on the glass next to him or on the counter below. But now when he's calling the game, like the Kansas City playoff game, when he is describing those things, those just come out of his mouth. I mean, it's unbelievable.
It's very
to kind of
organic.
see. Oh yeah, it's unbelievable to see. It's one of those things where the hairs on your neck stand up. But going back to what you're saying, Lito, with the you've just been Arakpo. Brian Arakpo says his little boy will say that when he comes home from a game. It says it's just the funniest thing. I think Brian likes it, but his little boy really likes it. So.
Wow, that's good. Yeah, he has some of the most iconic calls. Obviously the Music City Miracle, but that Kansas City game, standing on the Arrowhead at Arrowhead, like it'll give you the chills every single time.
Sure. Absolutely it will. And that's something with the Miracle. And again, I told you guys I started traveling with the team in '99, and that is the magical season.
Yep.
But to sit there between he and Pat Ryan and to hear that develop in real-time stereo,
wow.
And certainly I heard more of it from them speaking than the volume in my headphones, because the stadium, you couldn't hear anything. I mean, it was incredibly loud. But yeah, that was a surreal moment to witness that on the field, to see that exchange between he and Pat Ryan as it unfolded. And it was totally unscripted. I mean, it happened the way it happened. He let Pat step in and step on and back in and back forth. And that's something he would tell you is incredible, that he would get maybe his most famous call in the first year as the play-by-play voice of the Titans.
What was it like, if you can discuss it, what was it like after the smoke had cleared from the Music City Miracle? Like talking to Mike and just being there, being able to experience that magical moment live. Like
first of all, there was bear hugs exchanged and some high fives. I think this was pre-fist bumps for sure. But we all were in disbelief of, did we just really see that happen? Because you're talking about, it may be one of the top 5 finishes in an NFL regular game, and certainly in a playoff scenario, because you're talking about Alan Lowry, the special teams coordinator, had seen that from his days in college football. And they practiced the home run throwback at the end of every practice. And those guys thought it was just silly, because it's like, well, we'll never run this. And they decided to run it that day. And under the terms that they did, it was incredible, because Derek Mason had been knocked out of that game with a deep thigh bruise, and Ike Bird, another wide receiver, had been injured, and I forget what his injury was. Kevin Dyson wasn't even supposed to be out there. And the fact that it works the way, I mean, that's the miracle within the miracle. But yeah, after it happened, I mean, it was just, we all, I don't know that we admitted it aloud, but we had this feeling internally that it could be something special that could kind of jumpstart or springboard the team into something really good. And it ended up really being that way, minus the 1 yard short at the end.
Oh yeah. Ironically, it was the same guy too, Dyson, the guy who made the miracle happen. He's the one who came up 1 yard short, but
tackled by Mike Jones, the linebacker. Absolutely.
Yeah, I almost put my foot through the TV at that when I saw that. That one was frustrating.
Oh, listen, that was another surreal moment. When that was done, and we were kind of gathering ourselves, I went down to the locker room to get interviews, and to see grown men crying, and just, you talk about the gut punch of all gut punches. I was physically ill over that loss for about 3 or 4 days because it was just, because you knew it was special and how long would it take to get back to another one. And they haven't yet.
Yep.
I was a much younger guy when all that happened. But again, the arrow's pointing up, and I feel like John Robinson's building something special for sure.
Definitely.
Oh yeah, I think we're all pumped about that. And I'm sorry, we're just so excited to have you on here that every little bullet point that we're wanting to hit is taking some time to flesh out, because we're like,
oh no,
cow,
you're fine.
You were actually there for the Music City Miracle, so like, what did you see? And like, all the stuff is it's super surreal just talking to you. So you have to understand, I'm fanboying out a little bit right now.
That's same okay. Here, man.
That's quite all right.
Okay, so I'm sure you're gonna have stories here. I kind of want to talk about touch on the move from Houston to Nashville. Like, I'm for one, I'm glad that they did change the name. I mean, I'm a traditionalist, don't get me wrong, but there's not a whole lot of oil in Nashville, just like there's not a whole lot of lakes in LA, but they didn't change their name. So I'm
or
glad
a lot of jazz in Utah.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of stuff it's just like, come on, like know your audience, know where you're going. So I just kind of wanted to see how that was for you. I know you touched on it a little bit, but from the entire franchise just moving there, I mean, how it affected the city, the players adjusting to it, and anything else you can really talk to us about.
Well, I remember some players coming to an event at the courthouse that actually we helped cover as the radio station when they had the referendum as a public vote to decide to raise stocks, bonds, and tax dollars to fund a stadium to bring an NFL franchise to Nashville. And that was just crazy the night that vote came in. I think I still have bumper stickers laying around the house here somewhere from that campaign. And then kind of meeting some of the guys when they first trickled into town. But the crazy thing about all that, because this is before, and I went to a few games in Memphis, and Mike was on the network, but he was doing scoreboards at the time because he was still working for the Tennessee Volunteers radio network in Knoxville. But Mr. Adams, one of his most trusted guys, was the vice president of the Houston Oilers, Mike McClure. And Mike McClure had convinced Mr. Adams that while the stadium was being built in the 2 years that it would take, that it would be a good idea to place the team in Memphis. And of course, from a logistics standpoint, that's a nightmare for those poor guys that are still with the team today, getting all those arrangements together, because it was 16 road games in essence, because Nashville's a pretty good little distance from Memphis and vice versa. And so those guys, poor guys in 97, played 16 road games. But Mr. McClure had convinced Mr. Adams that there would be several thousand more in attendance for all of those home games in Memphis than there would be at Vanderbilt Stadium that holds about 40,000 people. And what Mike McClure didn't figure out, and they had a liaison there also, Pepper Rogers, who had coached in college and had a lengthy football background. But what they didn't realize, in Tennessee, there is the relationship between Memphis and Nashville has not always been good. Memphis, I think, kind of sees itself as the angry stepbrother of Nashville. I'm pretty sure they kind of see it that way. And there's never been a super great relationship between the two cities. I think they've always perceived that Nashville was where the state capital is, and commerce and businesses and things like, and certainly the legislatures run out of there. And I don't, it seems like there's some animosity there. And it seems like there always has been. And so sure enough, when they played the Oakland Raiders there in August of 97, the crowd, it wasn't that great, even though the Oilers won and Eddie George had almost over 200 yards on the ground, I think. But it became evident as the season clicked off game by game that the fans were not going to show up. And the worst part about it is the season finale. And I was there. I'll never forget this. But it was a home game at the Liberty Bowl against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it was like a home game for the Pittsburgh Steelers. There was 50,000 people in there, I think. But it was a sea of black and gold. And I remember getting off the bus there and just seeing Pittsburgh Steelers fans everywhere. And Mr. Adams, I think, was in attendance at that game that day, and that was the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And he immediately made arrangements to break the 2-year lease with the Liberty Bowl and got it together to have games played in the 1998 season at Vanderbilt Stadium, which attendance was much better at and much more received. And, then they built the stadium, finished the stadium, and opened up in August of 1999, and kind of the rest is history. But yeah, it was a strange time. And to your point, guys, you're right. There's a few oil wells in Tennessee, but they're mostly in West Tennessee, and there's just not much of that. And that was the perceived popular constant thought between everybody, most of the fan base. It was like, I don't think anybody really jumped on till a few games into the 99 season. There were certainly selling personal seat licenses and those things, but it really didn't start to bust and blossom open till you got on into the 99 season, because they were like, well, who are the Tennessee Oilers? You would run into people every once in a while. What happened to the Houston Oilers? You'd go to another city, you're like, whatever happened to them? Oh, they're in Nashville now. They're the Tennessee Oilers. And they're like, Tennessee Oilers. And so, that was when Mr. Adams decided to have a contest to rename the team, and there would be a new logo unveiled, and they unveiled a new logo in like 8 different cities in Tennessee simultaneously at the same time. And the Titans are part of Greek mythology, and the flame ball logo is a derivative of Prometheus, the god of fire, and because Nashville is kind of the Athens of the South, so it was that flair to it all. And it was certainly more received than Tennessee Oilers, for sure. And then as they started winning ball games in 99, people started jumping on like crazy. And then by the end of that season, the rest is history.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I didn't know some of that stuff. I didn't realize that the flame ball was from Prometheus. I knew the Athens of the South, and whenever we went out there, we went to the Parthenon, and we saw that was actually really cool. Mo, if you ever go out there, you got to go to that. They have this big, gigantic statue.
Well, I'm going out there this year, man. We're committed to it. So
you got to get that. You got to hit Broadway. You got to hit all this stuff. But I was not aware of the flame ball being a hat tip to Prometheus. That's really interesting. I knew the New York Giants or the Jets were previously the Titans back in the day.
That's right.
Correct? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Back in the AFL in the early 60s. That's right.
AFL. Okay. Well, I love the name. I really do. I've always been a fan of Greek mythology, and that's one of the reasons why I did actually kind of stick with them and go forward. And because Mo and I were both fans of the Oilers from before, and then whenever they moved over, I was still young, so it wasn't really a huge thing. But whenever they switched over to the Titans, it kind of solidified it for me. Like, oh yeah, I'm definitely staying with these guys. So, hat tip to whoever won that contest, because that built a lot of fans. Mo, you got anything on that?
yeah, I wanted to touch on something there. You got to experience, as you mentioned, 16 away games. Were the players, how affected were the players? Like, did they play kind of uninspired due to not being welcomed? And what would you say is the difference once they were reborn as this new Titans team? What do you think that helped dramatically, like with in terms of their own internal confidence?
I think that has a lot to do with it, Big Mo. The thing I remember hearing the most was how the families and the wives of the players weren't happy because they were having to arrange transportation to get to Memphis. No. And that's a whole nother story.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think absolutely when they were able to get in front of their own folks and have their own brand and their own identity, and I certainly think it was one of the catalyst elements in how they got to the Super Bowl. I don't think they played uninspired in Memphis and in Vanderbilt, because those are both 8-8 seasons.
8-8 seasons. Right.
They were still a team that was finishing up a building process, because what you got to remember is let's scroll back a few years. In 1993 was the first year of free agency, and they were loaded with talent from their run and shoot days with Warren Moon,
Hayward Jeffries,
all those guys. That's right. That's exactly right. And they had come off of a horrible loss in Buffalo in the wild card round in January of '93, and I remember where I was for that game as a much younger guy. But so free agency blew up everything, and So they were still rebuilding from those things. And they had some bad years because they drafted Steve McNair, 3rd overall pick in '95. And then the next year, the Heisman Trophy winner and Eddie George. And they picked up Frank Wycheck off the waiver wire for $100 from the Washington Redskins because they needed a good blocking tight end. And so, they still didn't have all the pieces. But no, I don't think they ever played just absolutely lackluster because, you think about some of the wins they had in that window of time, and there was a couple that was really special. In fact, the Thursday, or it was a Sunday night game, I guess it was, in Tampa in 1998, where they were trailing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who were really starting to get good at that time. And Steve McNair had about a 74-yard touchdown run to seal it up on national television. And, this is when he's really getting into his first couple of years as the regular starter of the team.
Yeah.
And, but in '99, you got to realize they added a couple of things. And certainly that '99 draft, I remember helping cover that at the portable trailer there in Bellevue at their practice facility. That was a crazy draft. You had a draft where the Chicago Bears old head coach Mike Ditka was the head coach of the Saints at that time, and he mortgaged the farm and three more farms to draft Ricky Williams. He gave away every draft pick he had and his first rounder the next year to get Ricky Williams at I think it was number 4 overall. And that really kind of set things in motion because Indianapolis picked a running back because they had Marshall Faulk leave in free agency, and they picked up Edgerrin James. And so every time a move like that happened, it kept bumping this guy down in their lap named Javon Curse at number 16.
Yep.
And that was a guy that absolutely, without a doubt, was a flat-out difference maker, a game wrecker, a game changer. 14 and a half sacks as a rookie. I think that's still a record. I have never seen a motor or a physically gifted athletic guy since him. And he was certainly one of the things that just put it into a next level. And then you had Steve McNair and Eddie George that were getting into their primes. So, it was kind of lightning in a bottle. It all happened at once.
I think that was the same year they got Zach Pillar, too, to shore up the guard spot. Well, I'm not too sure. I could be wrong.
You know what? I think you're right. And that's the other thing. They still had John Runyon at left tackle, who had been a high draft pick from before. And so the old line, they, got Kevin Long, a 7th rounder out of Florida State, to be the starting center, for the eventual AFC champions. So, but yeah, it's just one of those things. You never know.
It's cool to hear your take on it, man. Just having been there and kind of still fanboying it out over here, I guess.
So those are obviously pretty big pivotal moments in the franchise history, I would say. Those drafts and those signings. I didn't realize that Wycheck was picked up for $100 on the waiver wire.
Yep.
So that's a little bit of information for me for my next trivia night. What other kind of pivotal moments would you say are kind of from your perspective that led to where we are now?
Certainly the win streak at home in 1999. That was huge. The miracle we've discussed, that may be one of the crown jewel moments. It's the crown jewel piece of audio for Titans radio. It still is. I don't know that anything will ever be, have it taken its place at all. 3 straight wins over Jacksonville in that season, including the AFC Championship game to get to the Super Bowl, and then Super Bowl 34. No matter how it ended, that was, that's a pivotal moment because you're playing in the biggest game in the world at that time. The Music City Mulligan in the 2002 playoffs in the against the Pittsburgh Steelers in Nashville, where Joe Nedney lines up and kicks, and the fireworks go off, and he does as he called it, an Oscar-winning job of an NBA-type flop, and there was a penalty, and there's a redo, and he makes the field goal, and they send the Pittsburgh Steelers home empty-handed in the playoffs that year. And it was the season that followed it, 2003, Steve McNair's best season as a pro. Mike Heimerdinger had come in to be the offensive coordinator prior to that, and it made him a passing quarterback. And to see the numbers and things that he put up that year for sure. And I'll back up for 1 second too. In that 2002 season, one of my favorite Steve McNair games, the game at the Meadowlands against the Giants, where he led them back into that game and just had a busted ankle and a busted sternum and all these injuries. And he didn't think he would play, and he played like a warrior, and they snuck out of there with a win against a good Giants team and Kerry Collins and those guys. Flash forward a few years later, the Rob Barona's 60-yard field goal against the Colts at Nissan Stadium. I think it was 2006 or 7. Rob Barona's 8th field goal game in Houston. That was kind of crazy. I remember that day very well. Vince Young's walk-off 42-yard touchdown run to beat Houston in his rookie year in 2006. That was pretty crazy. Yep. The 99-yard drive that Vince Young led them on in Nashville against the Arizona Cardinals. That was really crazy because that started at obviously the 1-yard line, and that was with basically no time left. He hits Kenny Britt in the back of the end zone. And the funny thing about all that is VY was just drawing up plays in the dirt. I mean, that's how crazy all of that was. I had some of those, including Kenny Britt, tell me that some years later that it was all, I think Heimerdinger and him, it was all Vince, because Heimerdinger had just thrown his hands up and said, he's just let him do what he does. And that was the case a lot with Vince in some of those instances. The 10-0 start in 2008 that ended up being a 13-3 season. That was really cool to see all that unfold, because, you know, if you'll remember, there was all the drama with Vince in the preseason. And the next thing you know, Kerry Collins is the starter. And, you know, here he is with this leading this 13-3 team. And the afternoon in Seattle, when Chris Johnson rushed for 2,000 yards and reached the 2,000-yard mark, that was pretty wild. And then, you know, there was some bad moments after that, as the team was kind of searching for things again, and went through the draft of Jake Locker. That didn't work out, and Jake's such a great person. One of the nicest people you'll ever meet, and just, you know, couldn't stay healthy. And so they missed on basically 2 franchise quarterbacks there in that window of time. But flashing forward to more recent stuff, Marcus Mariota's first game in Tampa. Wow. Yeah. Holy I mean, you talk about just pouring it on. 4 touchdowns, and, you know, Cody Sensabaugh has a pick 6 of Jameis Winston off of one of his first couple of passes, and it was just a barn burner after that. The 87-yard touchdown run versus Jacksonville, December the 6th of 16 at Nissan Stadium, that Mariota had, I thought that was really cool. The stiff arm in Week 17 against Jacksonville this year of Barry Church, that was pretty wild. The 19-point comeback over Kansas City in the wild card round this year, that was wild. But I'll tell you what, and I'll answer it with this, and this may not be a completely expected answer. I'm going to catch you guys off guard with this one. I'll tell you a real pivotal moment to where we are currently with what's happened in the last 36 months with this ball team. When Tommy Smith, the son-in-law of Bud Adams, was running the show, and he hired Ken Wisenhunt, that's a pivotal moment. And you go, well, how did that a pivotal moment? That ended up terrible. Well, yes, it did. That ended up with a poor result. But you know what? It forced Amy Adams Strunk and her nephew Kenneth to get things together and to take over that team and to put it in the right direction, because it had hit such a bad spot. Because you're talking about a window of 2 seasons there. You go 5-27, and had he not done that, maybe we wouldn't be in the spot where we are right now, where the Titans are right now. Because what Amy's done in that time has been incredible. And listen, and I know we're going to get to this, but Mike Mularkey deserves a heck of a lot of credit to where this thing is right now. And I know that there was differences at the end in, you know, offensive philosophies and those things, but he took over that team with 9 games left in, what was that, the 2015 season, Mariota's rookie year. And, you know, no, they didn't get many wins out of that, but they were better than what they were as a record finishing up that year. And you saw evidence of that in 2016, because, you know, they didn't renew the contract of Rustin Webster as general manager. And so, like January the 16th of 16, they introduce Mike Mularkey as the full-time head coach, interim tag removed, and they introduced John Robinson, a guy from West Tennessee, a native of Tennessee, who cut his teeth running the roads, checking up prospects all over the country for the New England Patriots. And we all know what that product is and how many world championships those guys have. But Amy trusted the process and trying to make things. She wants, it's clear, she wants to win just as bad as any of us want to win. There's no doubt about that. But had Tommy Smith not hired Ken Whisenhunt, we might not be where we are right now. I really believe that. But those are definitely pivotal moments in the 20 seasons of Titans football, and certainly the last few.
Yeah, we're both obviously really big fans of Amy Adams Strunk and John Robinson. I don't think I actually gave as much. I don't think I gave as much credit to that Tommy Smith hiring, bringing in Whisenhunt to actually set that whole thing in motion. Because if you would have asked me before, it would have been Amy Adams Strunk kind of stepping up and taking control of everything and grabbing the bull by the horns and saying like, I've seen this done, I know how it's done. Just, I'm going to take this and, kind of follow what my dad did. And that was a huge, huge thing. And I think it's great that we do have a female majority owner for one. Not even just that, just the way she goes about things is just no nonsense, but still really fun and really relatable. And we're big fans of John Robinson as well. I think we bring him up just about every single time we talk. So that's actually a really cool perspective to almost thank Tommy Smith for bringing in Whisenhunt to kind of set this whole thing in motion. And I know Mo's got some questions on that whole thing that you went over there as well.
Oh, yeah. A ton of questions popped into my head as you were talking. One thing I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the connection with Heimerdinger and McNair, how he helped him orchestrate his best season as a pro. We bring in Matt LaFleur, and the same hope exists that hopefully he'll get Mariota to play beyond his ceiling, or at least up to his ceiling. Do you see that there's a comparison there, like with the two?
Yeah, I think there is, and certainly that's what the hope is. But yeah, Matt LaFleur is a 38-year-old guy. He's been in the league for a while now, but this is his first opportunity to call his own plays, and to hear him talk. And I'm sure a lot of other offensive coaches do. Coaches, period. They kind of build their playbook based on things that they've picked up along the way, not just stuff that they've drawn up and things that they've soaked up and learned throughout the years. But yeah, certainly the hope is that he is to Mariota what Heimerdinger was to McNair. And I don't know how you feel about Marcus Mariota, but I certainly feel, and I felt it from the first day from that Tampa game in 2015, and where the real bullets are flying in the regular season. Marcus Mariota has a chance to be an elite quarterback. And that's something that the Titans may have never had. And that's no disrespect to number 9, because Steve was certainly the toughest I've ever seen. And some things he's done, unbelievable. But Marcus Mariota, he's got all of that. And he's a very, very smart guy. And, I think getting a guy like Matt LaFleur to tailor things around him to bring out his best attributes, it can only be good in this instance, because the irony in parting ways with Mike Mularkey, not too dissimilar from parting ways with Ken Whisenhunt, because Ken Whisenhunt was stubborn in his offensive plan, and Marcus was getting killed in games. I mean, he missed 4 games that year at 2 different occasions due to a left and a right MCL of his knees. And, that was when Amy stepped in and said, look, you're not protecting the quarterback here. We have a huge future investment in this guy, and we got to make sure he's upright and done. Well, the same thing with Mike Mularkey. We saw they wanted to ground and pound, and certainly that worked in its spots. But you've got a quarterback like Marcus Mariota, you've got to bring things along in an aerial fashion, I think, to at least complement the run. So it's kind of odd that Mike Mularkey exits in a similar fashion to Ken Whisenhunt.
Very much so. I wanted to touch base on another thing, too. I mean, you brought it up when you talked about Vince and a little bit about what he did for the organization. And we also brought up Jake Locker and what he kind of ran into bad luck. You know, he just had some of the worst injuries I've ever seen. The Titans at the time, they were trying to find the next, not necessarily the next McNair, but the next franchise quarterback of the future. Struck out on Vince, struck out on Jake Locker. Mariota seems to be the guy now. What I wanted to ask you was, having been with the organization since the beginning, can you kind of compare the differences in terms of energy and fan buzz when the team drafted Vince, Locker, and compared to Marcus Mariota?
Well, yeah, I think, it's kind of unfair when you're talking about a Mariota because of the previous misses at franchise quarterback in that window of time. And so, yes, people were excited to get another signal caller, and certainly what he did in Oregon was unbelievable. But I'd say the buzz was probably bigger with Vince Young back then, because if you watch the 2000s, so. You watch the 2006 Rose Bowl.
Oh yeah,
you're going, holy Moses, sign this guy up. And that's kind of.
I was a Longhorns fan too, so I loved him. I loved him signing with Tennessee.
Oh gosh, I mean, yeah, because he had over 400 yards total offense and like 3 or 4 touchdowns. I mean, he was a one-man gang. It was unbelievable.
Yeah,
and certainly the excitement was there for that. And Jake Locker doesn't get a fair pass because that's the year that there was a lockout in the NFL in 2011, and people were kind of grabbing at quarterbacks because if you'll remember, the Vikings drafted Christian Ponder out of Florida State real high like that. Yeah. And, that stuff just didn't really work out. But I think people have seen enough body of work from Mariota that I think they know what he can do. And I think they're excited more right now, yes, with an offensive mind to see what the possibilities are, as you put it, Big Mo, to break through that glass ceiling. But yeah, that's going to be the interesting thing in covering this team in 2018 is, what's the offense going to look like? What are they going to do? What are they open to? And certainly with Mike Vrabel, you're talking about a guy that was a linebacker that, scored 12 touchdowns in the NFL as an extra tight end, and 2 of them in the Super Bowl. So, he's open to some trickery and certainly forward-thinking, open-minded plays. And that's no discredit to Mike Mularkey, because he had a playbook full of those things. I just think they got themselves pigeonholed and just wanting to stand on that hill and continue to talk about running the ball.
I'm definitely excited. Looking forward to what Mariota's going to do this year. Like you said, finally having a offensive-minded guy that's going to tailor the offense and use his weapons maybe a little bit differently than Mularkey did last season, and not get pigeonholed as you mentioned.
Yeah. I think the buzz is certainly there. I went to a season ticket member event the other night where they introduced Coach Vrabel, and there was, almost 8,000 season ticket holders there, and he got a very loud ovation when he was introduced. Eddie George came out and kind of kicked the thing off, and of course, what kind of ovation and Eddie chants that he got when he comes out, for sure, the all-time leading rusher in Titans history. But yeah, it's going to be fun kind of seeing what all is going to happen. There's a lot of cool calendar events coming up soon, as we'll be getting back into what leads up to the regular season.
So, Mo, did you have anything else on that? Are you ready to go to the next one?
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and jump through some of your other questions.
So aside from those, do you have any favorite personal stories or memories, Titans related or even non-Titans related, that you want to kind of talk about? Any personal experiences?
So I talked to you guys about kind of what the miracle was like, hearing it stereo live between the 2 people calling it. That was incredible. The leading up to the AFC Championship game in '99 against Jacksonville, that was something else. We stayed, the team hotel at that point we were staying at Sawgrass, the home of the TPC, home of the PGA. Really nice place. And just to hear all of the people in Jacksonville, Florida, just smack talk, running their mouth, it was incredible. And I had an uneasy feeling about, gosh, can they close the deal the 3rd time in a row to go to the Super Bowl? Holy Moses, can they do this? And certainly internally I thought yes, but I had my doubts, because it was just laws and averages and numbers, But you turn on the weather in the hotel room that morning, the day of the game, and the lady that's doing the weather forecast. It's going to be a beautiful day at it was then Alltel Stadium, but going to be a beautiful day at the stadium for the AFC Championship game, where I'm certainly the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to thump the Titans and go to Super Bowl 34. It's just like just a given, like rolled off her tongue like nothing, you know. As we're going to the stadium and just people talking, and we'd heard a lot of that in the short time we'd been there. You know, get into the press elevator to go to the press box, and the elevator operator's giving us lip about it. And it's crazy, because I told a couple of the Titans executives at the time, I was like, you're not going to believe this. I said, but even the elevator operator's running his mouth about how they're going to beat the Titans and this, and that, and the other. And they're like, oh, really? And when it was all said and done, I'm riding down that same elevator with the same elevator operator and a couple of the Titans executives, and they were like, is this the guy? I'm like, yep, that's him.
And that's where we break for part 1 of our interview with the great Rhett Bryan. Next week, we'll have more stories and more insight on major events, as well as what he expects to see from our Titans in the immediate future. Thanks so much for listening, and make sure you catch next week's finale, part 2. And remember to follow us on Twitter at Titan Southwest, and share us with your friends, your family members, your Twitter friends, or just a stranger you saw at the gas station once with a Titans hat on and we're excited to see another fan. We sincerely appreciate all the love shown in a short amount of time already from every one of you. Let's keep that up, and as always, tighten up.